The ground shook beneath his boots as the sky burned red. Smoke curled into the air, mixing with the smell of scorched metal and blood. Sergeant Daniel Kane could barely keep his eyes open through the sting of dust and ash. His left arm was wrapped in torn bandages, blood soaking through, but he refused to slow down. Somewhere ahead, beyond the ruined walls and collapsed towers, there had been a cry, a child's cry. It was faint, almost lost to the roar of battle, but he had heard it. And in the chaos of war, that sound mattered more than orders or survival. It was the sound of life. The city around him was an alien world, unlike anything on Earth. Tall crystalline spires had once reached to the clouds, glowing with soft blue light, but now they lay broken across streets. Fires raged in strange colors, green, violet, silver, burning without smoke, casting long, eerie shadows. The battle between humans and the invaders had turned into a massacre here, and Daniel had been separated from his squad. Alone, limping, and losing blood, he knew he had no time. The cry came again, sharper this time, and his instincts pushed him forward. He rounded a corner and stopped dead. The scene before him froze him in place. A small figure sat trapped beneath a collapsed archway, its tiny body trembling. Fur, soft and pale blue, covered the child's skin. Large fox-like ears switched in fear, and wide silver eyes stared up at him, reflecting both terror and hope. The child was alien, but no weapon in the galaxy could have made Daniel see it as an enemy. She was just a kid. Easy, he murmured, lowering his rifle and stepping forward. His voice was calm, though his heart raced. The child flinched but couldn't run, with a heavy chunk of crystal pinning her small leg. Daniel dropped to his knees, ignoring the spike of pain in his side. His hands worked quickly, prying at the debris until his wounded arm gave out. Gritting his teeth, he pushed harder. The crystal shifted, then rolled away with a heavy thud. The child let out a sound, half gasp, half sob, and clung to him without hesitation. Her tiny fingers gripped the torn fabric of his armor, and he could feel her heartbeat racing against his chest. She smelled faintly of something sweet, like wild flowers. Daniel lifted her into his arms, careful not to hurt her injured leg. She buried her face against his neck, trembling. Gunfire rattled somewhere nearby, and a strange mechanical screech followed. Daniel's training told him to retreat, but retreat to where? The city was crawling with enemies, both human and alien. He wasn't sure which side the attackers belonged to anymore. This war had splintered into chaos. But one thing was clear. The child was now his responsibility. He moved quickly, staying in the shadows of broken walls, avoiding open streets. The child made no sound, only holding onto him as if letting go meant death. His armor felt heavier. With each step, the pain in his arm spreading to his chest, but he pushed on. Somewhere he would find safety, if safety still existed in this city. A sudden movement ahead made him stop. A tall figure stepped out from the smoke, armored in black and silver. The helmet was smooth and featureless, but Daniel could feel the stare from behind it. The figure raised a weapon, and Daniel's muscles tensed. He shifted the child behind his shoulder, ready to shield her. The figure didn't fire. Instead, they lifted a hand slowly and removed the helmet. What Daniel saw made his breath catch. She was beautiful in a way that was almost unreal long. Blue hair flowed over her shoulders, her skin pale with a faint glow, her fox-like ears twitching. But her silver eyes burned with something fierce and unyielding. She spoke in a language he didn't understand, her voice sharp. The child in his arms stirred and made a sound, one word that seemed to change everything. The woman's eyes softened, and she stepped closer. Her gaze locked onto the child, and Daniel realized instantly, this was her mother. She reached out, and Daniel hesitated. He wasn't sure if she would take the child and vanish, or if she would strike him down the moment. She had her back. But then, her hand touched the child's hair gently, and a shudder went through her. The warrior's breath trembled, and she looked at Daniel in a way that was hard to read, part gratitude, part something else entirely. She said something again. Slower this time, pointing to her chest and then to his. Daniel didn't understand the words, but the tone was clear. This wasn't just thanks. She was making a declaration. The war still raged around them, but for her, something more important was happening. Her expression grew firm, almost commanding. The child's small voice repeated a phrase, and Daniel caught one word: bond. Whatever she was saying, it wasn't a request. This was something binding, something deep in her culture. She was telling him that by saving her child, he had claimed a place in their lives forever. And as the roar of battle closed in again, Daniel realized something else. In this war, he had just made an alliance that no army could break. Daniel's mind raced as he held the child close. The alien mother's silver eyes did not waver. Even with the chaos of battle all around, her focus stayed on him and the small life between them. She spoke again in that melodic yet sharp language, her voice carrying over the distant gunfire. The words were impossible to understand, but the tone was absolute. She wasn't asking. She was telling him something important, something final. Mother stepped closer, and Daniel could see her armor up close. It was nothing like human combat gear. Black metal plates flowed over her body like liquid, edged with glowing silver lines. Symbols were etched into each piece, some scratched and scarred from battle. She moved with the kind of grace only years of war could give. When she reached him, her hand brushed against his arm, then rested on the child's head, the little one. Stirred, whispering in her own language. Daniel felt the child's grip loosen slightly as she recognized her mother's scent. But even then, the small hands didn't let go of his torn armor completely. The mother noticed this and narrowed her eyes as if measuring him. Daniel got the feeling she was deciding whether he was worthy of something far greater than he understood. A sudden blast shook the ground, sending shards of crystal flying. Daniel ducked, shielding the child while the alien woman moved with lightning speed, her blade flashing to deflect the debris. He realized she was not just a soldier, she was an elite warrior. Whoever she was, her presence alone could make enemies hesitate. They didn't have time to stand still. Another screech echoed through the streets, followed by the metallic stomp of machines. Daniel knew the sound. It was the enemy's war drones, programmed to kill anything moving. The mother looked toward the sound, then back at him. Without a word, she motioned for him to follow. Daniel moved, ignoring the pain in his side. The child clung to him as they navigated the wreckage. The alien mother stayed ahead, cutting down drones with impossible precision. She moved like a shadow, her blade slicing through armor as if it were paper. Daniel kept pace as best he could, but his wound slowed him. Every few steps he stumbled, yet he never loosened his grip on the child. They reached what had once been a massive archway, now half collapsed. Beyond it was a courtyard with tall ruined statues. Strange glowing plants had taken root in the cracks, their light casting a ghostly glow. The mother stopped and signaled for silence. Daniel froze, adjusting his breathing to quiet the sound. The child's small head turned, ears twitching as if sensing something. Then Daniel saw them, two figures moving through the smoke. These were not human soldiers. They were taller, their limbs too long, their movements insect-like. Armor plates covered their bodies, and weapons glowed in their clawed hands. The mother tensed, her eyes narrowing. She whispered something that sounded like a warning. Daniel didn't need translation. They were in danger. The first enemy leaped forward, but the mother was faster. Her blade cut through its chest before it even touched the ground. The second raised its weapon toward Daniel. He turned his body, shielding the child, and fired his rifle. The blast tore through the creature's shoulder, spinning it around. The mother finished it with a swift strike, her movements flawless. The courtyard was silent again, except for the faint crackle of distant fires. The mother's gaze shifted back to Daniel. She stepped closer, speaking softly now. Her voice was no longer sharp, it carried a weight, like a vow. She touched her hand to her own chest, then placed it lightly over his heart. The gesture was slow and deliberate. Daniel didn't understand her words, but he understood the meaning. This was the life bond she had spoken of before. In her culture, this was more than gratitude, it was an unbreakable tie. By saving her child, he had tied their fates together. Whatever that meant, it was not something either of them could undo. The child looked between them and gave a small, approving sound, as if agreeing with the choice. Daniel's instincts told him that refusing would not only insult the mother, but could mark him as an enemy. And strangely, despite the danger, despite the unknown, he didn't want to refuse. Another rumble shook the ground, closer this time. The mother's ears flicked toward the sound. She pointed toward the far end of the courtyard, where a narrow passage led deeper into the ruins. Her meaning was clear, they had to move again. Daniel adjusted his grip on the child and followed. He still didn't know her name, or the child's. He didn't know why this bond mattered so much to her people. But as they moved into the dark passage, one thing became certain. This was no longer about surviving the battle. This was about something deeper, something that might outlast the war itself. The narrow passage was dark and cold. Broken walls leaned in from both sides, making it feel like a tunnel. Daniel's boots crunched on shards of crystal underfoot. The only light came from the soft glow of the alien mother's armor and the strange plants clinging to the cracks. The child's small hands gripped his armor tightly, her ears twitching at every distant sound. He tried to steady his breathing. His wound throbbed with each step, sending sharp pain through his chest. The mother glanced back at him, her eyes catching the dim light. She noticed his limp, the way his free hand pressed against his side. Without a word, she slowed her pace, staying close enough to shield him if needed. They moved deeper until the passage opened into a wide hall, half collapsed. From the bombardment, statues of alien warriors lined the walls, each one holding a weapon unlike anything Daniel had seen. Dust floated in the air, glittering faintly in the light. The mother stopped at the center of the hall and knelt beside a fallen pillar. She pulled a small pouch from her belt and opened it. Inside were thin silver leaves that shimmered as if alive. She took one, crushed it between her fingers, and pressed it against Daniel's wound. He hissed in pain, but the burn faded quickly into a cool numbness. The mother spoke a quiet word, her tone softer than before. Daniel nodded, understanding her intent even without knowing the language. She was healing him. The child reached out and touched his arm, her silver eyes wide with concern. For a brief moment, the war outside felt far away. The only thing that mattered was the strange, fragile connection forming between the three of them. A deep rumble shook the ground again. Dust rained from the ceiling. The mother's head snapped toward the far end of the hall. From the darkness, shapes began to move. Daniel's grip tightened on his rifle. These were not drones or soldiers, these were hunters. They crawled on four limbs, their bodies long and thin, their faces hidden under plated masks. Long spines jutted from their backs, and their movements were silent, but fast. The mother rose in one smooth motion, drawing her blade. She looked at Daniel and pointed to a low archway on the side of the hall. He understood instantly. She wanted him to take the child and hide. But Daniel wasn't about to leave her to fight alone. He shifted the child to one arm and raised his rifle with the other. The first hunter leapt forward, and Daniel fired. The shot caught it in the shoulder, spinning it sideways. The mother was already moving, her blade flashing as she cut down another. The fight was fast and brutal. The hunters moved like shadows, striking from all sides. Daniel stayed close to the wall, using it to shield his injured side while covering the mother's back. Twice, a hunter got too close. and Daniel's rifle became a club, smashing into armored heads. Finally, the last one fell, its mask cracked and glowing fluid spilling from the wound. The hall was silent again, except for the heavy sound of their breathing. The mother glanced at him, and for the first time, a small smile touched her lips. It was quick, almost hidden, but it was there. She walked to the archway she had pointed to earlier. Daniel followed, carrying the child, who now seemed calm despite the fight. They stepped into a smaller chamber, its walls lined with strange carvings. A faint humming filled the air, coming from a large stone in the center. The stone glowed faintly, and Daniel felt warmth radiating from it. The mother spoke a word Daniel had heard before when she looked at him in the courtyard bond. She gestured to the stone, then to him, then to herself and the child. Her expression was serious again. Daniel understood. This was where she intended to seal whatever promise her people believed in. He hesitated. This was a war zone, and yet here they were, about to perform some ancient ritual. But looking into her eyes, he realized this wasn't just about tradition. To her, this was survival. A bond meant protection, unity, and trust. Without it, they were just strangers in the middle of a battlefield. He nodded slowly. The mother stepped forward and placed her hand on the stone. She spoke in her language, her voice low and steady. The child reached out and placed her tiny hand next to her mother's. Then they both looked at Daniel. For a long moment, he stood still. Then, without breaking eye contact, he placed his hand beside theirs on the warm stone. The glow brightened, and the hum grew louder. Daniel didn't understand the words she spoke next, but he felt the weight of them. Something had changed. Bond was sealed. The glow from the stone slowly faded, but its warmth stayed in Daniel's palm. He didn't know what had just happened, but the mother's expression told him it was final. Whatever this bond meant, it was now part of him. The child looked at him with something like trust that had not been there. When he first found her, the mother stepped back, scanning the room for danger. Even here, in what seemed like a sacred place, she did not relax completely. Daniel knew why. The war would not stop because of a ritual. Somewhere outside these walls, machines and soldiers were still tearing the city apart. Without warning, a loud boom echoed through the ruins, followed by the shriek of metal twisting. Dust rained from the ceiling. The mother's ears flicked toward the noise, and she moved toward the door. Daniel adjusted the child in his arms and followed. They emerged back into the wide hall they had fought through earlier, but now it was darker. Smoke had begun to fill the space, and the air tasted of burning oil. The bodies of the hunters still lay scattered across the floor, but something was wrong. Daniel noticed quickly their weapons were gone. The mother's eyes narrowed. She spoke quickly, pointing toward the far end of the hall. Daniel understood enough to know they were being hunted again. Whoever had taken the weapons wanted to strike before they could escape. They moved quickly, weaving between fallen pillars and broken walls. Daniel's wound still ached, but the strange leaf medicine she had used was keeping him moving. The child stayed quiet, her head resting against his shoulder. She seemed to sense the danger around them. They reached a narrow set of stairs carved into the stone, leading upward. The mother went first, her blade ready. Daniel followed, each step creaking under his weight. When they reached the top, they stepped into the open air. The city stretched out below them, burning towers, collapsed bridges, and flashes of gunfire lighting the smoke. The sound of battle was louder here. Daniel spotted movement in the distance, human soldiers fighting alongside alien warriors like the mother. That surprised him. Until now, he had thought both sides were enemies. The mother seemed to notice his confusion. She spoke a single word, one that sounded almost like allies. He wasn't sure if she meant now or in the past, but it was clear the lines in this war were not as simple as he had thought. The moment was cut short by a sharp whistle in the air. Daniel recognized it instantly, a mortar round. He dove behind a wall, shielding the child as the blast hit nearby. The mother rolled to the side, already scanning for the source. Figures emerged from the smoke below. They were armored like the hunters but heavier, their movements slower but stronger. One carried a large weapon that glowed with red light. Daniel felt a chill run down his spine. The mother turned to him and spoke quickly, pointing toward a half-collapsed bridge in the distance. Her meaning was clear. He had to take the child there while she held the attackers back. Daniel shook his head. He wasn't leaving her to face them alone. Another blast shook the ground. One of the attackers charged up the stairs. The mother met him halfway, her blade clashing against his weapon with a sound like ringing steel. Sparks lit the air as they fought. Daniel fired at the others below, forcing them to take cover, but there were too many. Another enemy reached the top and swung a heavy blade toward Daniel. He barely blocked it with the edge of his rifle, the impact jarring his injured side. The child whimpered, holding tighter to him. That sound lit something in him, a surge of strength that pushed away the pain. He slammed the enemy back and fired point blank. The shot tore through the armor, sending the body tumbling down the stairs. The mother glanced back at him briefly, and for the first time, there was no doubt in her eyes. She trusted him. Together, they fought their way to the bridge. The structure groaned under their weight, parts of it missing, leaving gaps above a deadly drop. The wind carried the smell of smoke and ash. When they reached the middle, the mother stopped. She looked at him, then at the child, then back at him again. Her voice was calm but heavy with meaning. She pointed to herself, then to him, and finally to the burning city behind them. Daniel understood. She was saying that after this, their lives were tied not just by the bond, but by the war itself. Daniel nodded. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. The bridge trembled under their boots as the battle raged in the distance. Heat from burning buildings rose into the air, mixing with the smell of scorched metal. Daniel tightened his hold on the child, glancing over his shoulder. The enemies they had fought earlier were not giving up. Their dark shapes were moving through the smoke, closing in again. The mother's silver eyes were locked forward. She moved with speed and purpose, guiding them across the broken bridge. Every gap they jumped felt like a step away from safety and a step deeper into the unknown. The child's small arms clung to Daniel's neck, her heartbeat racing against his chest. Halfway across, a sudden deep hum filled the air. Daniel knew that sound. It was the power-up of a heavy energy weapon. His instincts screamed at him to move. Without thinking, he pushed the mother toward a chunk of fallen wall while he dove with the child in the opposite direction. A bright red beam cut through the bridge, melting the stone where they had been standing. Chunks of debris fell into the abyss below. The bridge groaned as cracks spread under their feet. The mother shouted something sharp in her language, pointing toward the far side. Daniel understood. There was no going back. They had to reach the other end now or die here. They ran there, boots pounding against the unstable surface. Daniel's side burned with pain, but he pushed harder. The enemies appeared behind them, firing weapons that splintered the stone. The mother deflected one shot with her blade, the impact throwing sparks into the air. Daniel returned fire, hitting one of the attackers square in the chest and sending it tumbling into the void. They reached the far side, scrambling onto solid ground. Daniel set the child down behind a low wall, shielding her with his body. The mother stood at the edge, her blade ready, as the last few enemies tried to cross the damaged bridge. The structure finally gave way, collapsing under them with a thunderous crack. Their screams echoed briefly before being swallowed by the depths. For a moment, there was silence. Daniel leaned against the wall, catching his breath. His hands trembled from the rush of adrenaline. The child peeked out from behind him, her silver eyes wide but calm. The mother stepped closer, her armor faintly glowing in the dim light. She looked at Daniel with a gaze that held both relief and something unspoken. Before either could speak, a deep roar cut through the quiet. It wasn't the sound of machines or soldiers, it was something alive. The ground shook beneath them. From the smoke ahead, a massive creature emerged. Its body was covered in thick black scales, and its eyes glowed like molten gold. Long claws scraped the stone as it moved, and its mouth opened to reveal rows of sharp teeth. The child gasped, clutching Daniel's arm. The mother's expression hardened. She whispered a single word that Daniel didn't understand, but the tone was clear. This was a predator, a hunter of her world. And it was coming for them. The creature lunged forward, its claws tearing through the ground. The mother moved to meet it, her blade flashing in the dim light. Daniel fired at its head, but the shots only left scorched marks on its scales. The beast roared, swiping at him with one massive claw. He barely rolled out of the way, pulling the child with him. The mother leapt onto the creature's back, stabbing at the gaps between its scales. The beast twisted violently, throwing her off. She hit the ground hard, but rolled to her feet. Daniel saw his chance. He spotted a weak spot near the creature's neck, where the armor-like scales were thinner. He set the child behind a pillar and charged forward, ignoring the burning pain in his side. The creature turned toward him, its jaw opening wide. Daniel slid under its swing, pressing his rifle against the exposed spot, and fired. The blast ripped through flesh and bone, and the beast let out a deafening roar before collapsing to the ground. Silence returned, broken only by the crackle of distant fires. Daniel dropped to one knee, his chest heaving. The mother walked to him, her blade still in hand. She looked at the dead creature, then at him, her gaze filled with something deeper than gratitude. She stepped closer and placed her hand on his shoulder, speaking softly. The child joined them, resting her small hand on his other arm. Daniel didn't understand the words, but he knew their meaning. This was no longer just about the bond. They were now something more, an unshakable unit, forged in the heart of battle. Asterisk, the beast's body still steamed on the cracked stone, its golden eyes dimming. The air was thick with heat and the faint metallic smell of blood. Daniel leaned on his rifle for support, his breath heavy. Every muscle in his body ached, but the child's small voice calling his name made him straighten. The mother stood beside him, silver hair falling over her armor. Her eyes studied him for a long moment. There was no anger, no suspicion, only something steady and unshakable. She said his name slowly, as if committing it to memory. Then she spoke another word, one Daniel had heard whispered before bond. This time, she placed her hand firmly over his heart, her fingers pressing through the dented armor. From the ruined streets beyond, more sounds of battle drifted toward them, distant gunfire, the howl of machines, shouts in many languages. The war was still raging, but for the three of them, the fight here was over. The mother looked out toward the burning skyline, her ears twitching to every distant noise. Then she turned back and pointed toward the mountains that rose beyond the city. Her meaning was clear. They had to leave before the next wave came. They moved quickly, weaving through alleys and over rubble. The mother took the lead, her blade always ready. Daniel stayed close behind, carrying the child when she grew tired. The bond between them no longer felt strange. It felt right. As they climbed higher toward the edge of the city, the smoke began to thin. The air was cooler here, touched by the mountain wind. Daniel could see small lights flickering far ahead, safe camps perhaps. The mother slowed and raised her hand, signaling for them to stop. Below, on a stretch of broken road, a squad of armored figures moved in formation. These were not the hunters or beasts, they wore the markings of her people. They looked disciplined, powerful, and dangerous. Daniel's instincts told him to stay hidden, but the mother didn't hesitate. She stepped out into the open. The squad froze at the sight of her, and then, in unison, They lowered their weapons and knelt. The leader removed his helmet, revealing the same silver eyes and fox-like ears as the mother. His gaze fell to the child, safe in Daniel's arms, and his posture changed from soldier to something more personal relief. The mother spoke quickly to him, her tone carrying authority. Every soldier listened without question. Daniel couldn't understand the words, but he could tell she was explaining everything: how she had found the child, how Daniel had saved her, how they had fought together. The leader's eyes settled on Daniel, and something like respect passed between them. Then the mother did something unexpected. She stepped to Daniel's side and took his injured arm gently in her hands. She lifted it for all her soldiers to see, and then she spoke one clear, strong word: bond. The reaction was immediate. The soldiers struck their chests with closed fists, a gesture that seemed both a salute and a pledge. Daniel realized what she had done. She had made the bond public. Whatever her people's law or tradition, she had just declared him part of her family, protected under their honor. That meant no one could challenge him without challenging her. And from the way these soldiers looked at her, no one would dare. The leader stepped forward and offered Daniel a small metal crest, its surface engraved with the same markings he had seen on her armor. Daniel accepted it without a word. He didn't need a translation to know it was a symbol of belonging. They moved together toward the mountains, the soldiers forming a protective circle around them. The city behind them was still burning, but each step forward felt like leaving the war behind, if only for a moment. The child rested her head on Daniel's shoulder, already half asleep. The mother walked beside him, her expression calm, but her hand never far from her blade. When they reached the first campfires, the soldiers began their preparations for the night. The mother guided Daniel to a quiet corner, away from the noise. She spoke softly, pointing at the child, then at him, then at herself. She didn't need to explain the words. The meaning was clear. From this day on, they were bound not just by the bond of her people, but by choice. Daniel looked at her, then at the sleeping child in his arms. He thought of the ruins, the battles, the beast they had faced. He thought of how she had fought beside him, trusted him, and risked her life as he had risked his. And in that moment, he knew this was no longer about survival. It was about something worth surviving for. Far above them, the first stars appeared. In the night sky, the war would find them again, but tonight, under the mountain wind and the quiet watch of the camp, the human warrior, the alien mother, and her child were together. And in a galaxy at war, that was the rarest victory of all.